So think about it. How many promises have you actually made today? Seriously, from that coffee you grabbed this morning to maybe signing a lease, every single one of those promises, big or small, is governed by a set of invisible rules. Today, we're going to decode those rules, and we'll do it by digging into some of the most famous and frankly weirdest legal battles that shaped the entire world of contracts.
All right, let's jump right in. We're going to follow the natural life cycle of a contract. We'll start at the very beginning, at its birth, look at all the things that keep it alive and kicking, and then see what happens when a deal just falls apart.
So first things first, how does a simple chat, or maybe even just a newspaper ad, magically transform into an agreement that the law will actually enforce?
Well, it really all boils down to two key things: a crystal clear offer and an equally clear acceptance. That's the magic moment, right? It's that meeting of the minds where everyone's on the same page.
This brings us to an amazing case from way back in 1893, Carlyle versus the Carbolic Smoke Ball Company. Now, this company ran this wild ad for its product. A woman, Mrs. Carlyle, she bought one, she used it exactly like they said to, and you guessed it, she still got the flu. So when she went to claim her $100, the company basically said, "No way, that was just marketing fluff."
But here's the kicker. The court completely disagreed. It ruled that the company's ad wasn't just, puffery or an exaggeration. By putting that £1,000 in the bank, they showed they were dead serious. This was a general offer to the entire world, and Mrs. Carlyle accepted it simply by doing what the ad said. The big takeaway here? A promise you make to the world can become a real contract with anyone who follows the instructions. They had to pay up.
But hold on. Not everything that looks like an offer is an offer. A completely different case involving a pharmacy, Boots Cash Chemists, really helps us see the difference. When you see a product on a shelf with a price on it, is the store offering to sell it to you? The court said, nope. That display is just an invitation to treat. It's an invitation for you to make an offer. The contract only actually happens when you take it to the cashier and they agree to sell it to you. So, we've got an offer and acceptance. We're done, right? Not quite. For a promise to be legally alive, it needs a heartbeat. And in contract law, that heartbeat is what lawyers call consideration. Something of value has to be exchanged.
Basically, this means you can't get something for nothing. A simple promise to give a gift? Usually not a contract. There has to be a two-way street, an exchange. But what happens if that exchange is meant to help someone who isn't even part of the deal? Can they sue if things go south?
This brings us to a really core idea called privity of contract, which is just a fancy way of saying only the people in the deal can sue on the deal. The classic case for this is Tweddle v. Atkinson. You had two fathers who promised each other they'd give money to the groom. Well, one of them died without paying, and the groom tried to sue. The court said no. Since he wasn't part of that original agreement between the fathers, he had no right to enforce it. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. That strict rule, it's not universal. Indian law actually takes a totally different approach. In a case called Chinniya v. Ramaya, an old woman gave property to her daughter, with one condition. The daughter had to pay an annuity to the woman's sister. The daughter later refused to pay. But this time, the court allowed the aunt to sue and win, even though she wasn't a direct party. Why? Because under Indian law, the consideration, that thing of value, can come from any other person, not just the two people making the deal. A contract isn't just about a technical exchange of promises. It's really about a true meeting of minds. And for that to be valid, the people involved have to be legally capable of making the deal, and they have to be doing it freely without any pressure.
So the law draws a very, very clear line to protect people it considers vulnerable, especially minors. In most places, you have to be 18 to have the full legal capacity to enter into a contract that will stick.
So what happens if you do make a contract with a minor? A landmark Indian case, Mohori Bibi, made the answer crystal clear. That contract is void ab initio, which is just Latin for void from the beginning. It's not just breakable, it's like it never, ever happened. And the law protects the minor so completely that they often don't even have to return whatever they got out of the deal. And it's not just about age. Your consent has to be given freely. Take the case of Lloyd's Bank v. Bundy. An elderly farmer had a long, trusting relationship with his bank manager. When his son's business started failing, the manager convinced the farmer to mortgage his only real asset, his house, to cover the debt. The court later stepped in and canceled that mortgage. It was a classic example of undue influence. The power imbalance was so huge that the farmer's consent just wasn't truly free.
Okay, let's add one more layer to this.
even if you have all the right pieces, offer, acceptance, consideration, the works. If the whole point of your contract is illegal or just plain against the public good, the law will refuse to enforce it.
A perfect example of this is something called restraint of trade. Your employment contract can totally stop you from working for a competitor while you're still employed. That's considered fair. But what about after you quit? The case of Niranjan Golikari made it clear that under Indian law, any clause that tries to stop you from joining a competitor after you've left is almost always void. The law really values a person's freedom to go out and earn a living.
And this is a brilliant example of how courts step in to protect the public. In the Central Inland Water Transport case, a government company had a rule that let them fire permanent employees with just 3 months' notice for literally no reason at all. The Supreme Court struck that rule down, calling it unconscionable. It went against public policy because it gave one side absolute, unchecked power over the other.
Okay, we've built our contract. It's solid, it's legal, but what happens when the world just throws a massive curveball? What if some totally unexpected event, something that's nobody's fault, makes the entire deal impossible or just completely pointless?
This is where something called the doctrine of frustration comes in. It was famously established in Taylor v. Caldwell. In that case, a man rented a music hall for a bunch of concerts, but before the first one could even happen, the hall burned to the ground. The court said the contract was frustrated. The entire subject of the deal was gone, so both sides were let off the hook.
But here's the catch. For a contract to be frustrated, its entire foundation has to be wiped out. This slide shows it perfectly with 2 cases from the canceled coronation of King Edward VII. In Krell v. Henry, someone rented a room for the one and only purpose of watching the procession. When it was canceled, the whole point of the contract was gone. It was frustrated. But in Herne Bay, a boat was hired to see the naval review and for a cruise. The review was canceled, but the fleet was still there. Since part of the purpose still existed, the contract was not frustrated. So when you think about it, from the general offer of a loyalty card you accepted by buying that coffee, to the terms you agreed to just by watching this, contract law is the invisible architecture of our daily lives. All these old, sometimes strange cases about smoke balls and royal parades, they built the very foundation of the promises we all live by every single day.